The new Blood Angels Codex came out a few months ago, and when it did, I got really excited because when I saw the cover, I noticed this guy here, and I thought, that must mean they're updating the Sanguinary Guard kit.
It's false. No way. Not this time. Pure fiction. It never happened.
So if you've been in this hobby for any amount of time, you might be familiar with this feeling, hoping that your army is going to get updated or your favorite unit or whatever, and it doesn't. And you can rage and shake your fist all you want at Games Workshop and their fickle nature.
God damn you all to hell!
Or you can just take matters into your own hands and convert your own, which is what we're going to do today. So first, let's talk about what is wrong with the previous Sanguinary Guard kit. Well, as you can see, it's about 10 years old, so it's not too old. It's not as old as like certain other models in the range. And it's not too bad. It's got lots of cool, very Blood Angels-y detail. The funerary masks that are the distinctive part of their look are really cool, but the proportions are all off. They're mini Marines. Now, if you haven't been paying attention, over the past couple of years, Games Workshop has released Primaris Marines, and they are replacing the old Space Marines, which are now referred to as mini Marines because of their much smaller proportions. Some people are upset about this. I'm actually, personally, I really like it. First of all, because I don't have a huge nostalgic attachment to the old Space Marines because I was a Warhammer Fantasy player, but also because I think the new Marines are just much better proportioned to represent the 8-foot tall gene-enhanced warriors that Space Marines are supposed to be. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at this diagram by illustrator Andrew Loomis. You can see here that an idealized human proportion is around 8 heads tall, and a heroic scale one is even more, 9 heads tall. The smaller the head is relative to the body, the more heroic and the more mythical it looks. On the other side, there's what he calls the academic proportions, which are only 6 heads tall, and he refers to this as dumpy. So how does the Sanguinary Guard stack up? Well, here's one of them. And as you can see, they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 heads tall. And that's being generous. As you can see, that one is actually halfway below his foot. So let's call it 4.5, 5. Either way, there's a bit of a proportion issue. I'm sure you'll agree. It gives it sort of a cartoony proportion, a cartoony look that I'm not a huge fan of. So let's cross the Rubicon Primaris and upgrade these guys to have a larger body like they always should have. So the first thing I'm going to use is one of the bodies from the Assault Intercessor kit. I like these because they're already in dynamic lunging proportions, but what we're going to do is we're going to take it to a next level, and we're actually going to modify the poses so that rather than in a running pose, they're going to look a little bit like they're flying. And I think this is going to really capture some of the feeling of this front illustration, where any illustrator worth salt will take these cool winged golden angelic figures and he'll put them in the sky as a nice contrast to show that no, they're not just another Blood Angels unit running across the table. These guys are coming in from the sky to bring the wrath of Sanguinius and smite the enemies off the table. So I start by clipping that off the sprue, test fitting it together, and then the first thing I do is remove the Aquila chest plate from the Assault Intercessor because the Sanguinary Guard have what's called Artificer armor, complete with nipples and a rippling six-pack, and it's a really key part of their look. So I test fit that as well. I end up deciding to trim off the little loincloth, and then with some thick plastic glue, I glue that in place. Now the reason I use thick plastic glue, which is usually used for bigger model kits, is it makes a big gummy mess in all the joints and will keep me from having to have a super clean joint as I do this, which really speeds up the process. So let's take a look at some arms. We have this one here holding a chainsword, which is not a very Sanguinary Guard type weapon to use, so let's give him some of the weapons from the sprue. And because this model is in this really great twisting position already, this is a perfect guy to be holding the double-handed axe that comes on the Sanguinary Guard kit. And what we'll end up with is a pose that is transformative from the original Assault Intercessor model and also from the Sanguinary Guard model. So something brand new that's the best of both worlds. But obviously these kits out of the box don't want to fit like that. So I'm going to have to cut this arm down and then do a little bit of surgery to make it work. I start by cutting off the chainsword at the wrist and then also carefully clipping away the shoulder pad that comes attached. Now this is another change in the way Games Workshop has been making kits recently. The Sanguinary Guard kit is all totally modular. You can choose different arms and then add different shoulder pads. Whereas the Assault Intercessor kit are what they call monopose, which is to say the models have one pose and they look great in that position, but if you want to do a different position, you're going to have to clip and sand and file, and that's fine. It's not too hard to do, which is part of what I'm showing you today.
The man has only one look, for Christ's sake! Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
So you can see I hold up the axe in relatively the right pose, and then I start basically hacking away at the arm to get it into that position. With that done, I trim things down until they're fit pretty well. It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage, and then I glue things together with that plastic cement. So I choose a shoulder pad and I test fit it on there, and as you can see, there's still too much plastic sticking up from the shoulder. The nice thing about these big pauldrons, these shoulder pads, is that they hide a lot. So you don't really have to make a clean shoulder, you just need to make it fit under the pauldron, which I do by cutting away a little bit with my X-Acto knife, and this pauldron will go on nicely and hide all your mistakes in there. At this point, I test fit the head to make sure that I'm dealing with something feasible here in terms of where he's looking and where his arms are, and I am, and I'm happy with that. Next, to attach the jump pack, I start by test fitting it by holding it onto the model in the place where the normal Intercessor's backpack would go, and I really don't like the angle it's on. The body's already in a nice twisting position, and I don't want his backpack to be all the way to the side. I want it to be more behind him. So I shave off a little bit of that platform just to change the angle. Very simple adjustment that I think pays dividends. With the tip of my X-Acto blade, I make a mark in the bottom of the foot, and this is just a little groove for my drill bit to go into so I can drill a hole in his foot. With a piece of wire, I form the wire into a coil shape with a protruding top piece. This is going to be sort of the flight stand, so to speak. Games Workshop makes flying stands that are always out of clear plastic. They always have a big bubble in the middle of them, and they are notorious for breaking. So I'm just going metal here. It's much more durable, and I don't mind the look of one black thing supporting the model. It's really not very noticeable at a distance, and I can suspend my disbelief. If you have a problem with this, I'd love to hear your solutions in the comment below. Some people like to 3D print big smoke plumes or things like that that will support the model. I personally don't like that look very much. In my opinion, when it comes to the pose of a model, anything that betrays a prevalent wind direction is starting to get risky for me, because then you can have conflicting wind directions. Maybe, for example, Mephiston, his cape is blowing in a really dynamic way. So what if he's standing next to a guy holding a banner which is going the other way? Are we in the middle of a tornado? Is that what I'm to believe? Which way is the wind blowing? You know what I mean? I don't want my models to make that decision for me. But that's just a personal preference thing. So once I've made that little flight stand, I fit it into the bottom of his foot. And then I mix up some 2-part green stuff epoxy putty. This is what I'm going to use to fill all the gaps that I left from the last portion. To apply this green stuff putty, I'm using some silicone tipped sculpting tools. I'll put a link for these in the description below. They're really, really handy. Nothing sticks to silicone, and green stuff can be a nightmare if you get all sticky with it. But another real good trick to handle this stuff without it sticking is I put a little bit of vegetable oil on the back of my hand. Just a tiny bit, just 1 drop. So when I need a little bit of lubrication on my tools or my fingertips, I just have it right there on the back of my hand, and it makes things really nice and easy. So to fill in these gaps, I apply a small amount of putty to the gaps and then squish it in with that silicone tool, smoothing it around until I'm pretty happy with it. And once you're happy with how that looks, you can either wait for it to dry, or if you're impatient like me, you can just put super glue right on top of the wet green stuff and it'll bond quite nicely. In this case, I put a dab of super glue and then I put the Sanguinary Guard's head on top of that. And because the putty is still wet, I have a great deal of freedom in how I adjust the pose of the head, and it'll still stick right in place when I'm done posing it. So I can get exactly the angle of the head that I'm looking for. There are a few more gaps around the model where the chest plate meets the waist and in the wrist areas, and I fill those in as well. And when I'm done filling gaps, I use the excess putty that I mixed up and squish it down onto his stand, and then press in the piece of wire that I made earlier for the flight stand, and this is going to give it a nice solid base that should be nice and stable and keep from detaching with reasonable wear and tear. And then the final step is to add the wings to the Sanguinary Guard jump pack, which I do with a nice blob of that thick plastic cement. This is a very small joint and another place where this thick plastic cement really comes in handy. It really bonds well, especially on a hidden joint. I strongly recommend using this. The thinner Games Workshop plastic cement is good for a ton of applications, but for a really small point of contact like this, the thicker stuff is better. And there it is. We have one uniquely posed, beautiful Sanguinary Guard. Now I did this with a couple other guys as well using the same techniques, and I got some pretty cool results. This guy, you can see I made him in more of a flying pose, almost like a Superman-esque, nearly horizontal pose, gesturing forward with his sword in a heroic way. I really like how that one turned out. This guy might be my favorite. He's sort of more upright than the original Assault Intercessor torso was, and I adjusted the leg a little bit too, because I wanted him to look like he's landing. Like he's swooping down and lifting one leg so he can sort of continue his momentum in stride. And I think it's just a really cool, powerful looking pose. So here they are, guys, my Primaris Sanguinary Guard. Now some of you in the comments may be saying the Sanguinary Guard should not be Primaris, and so I'm going to address that right now. The Sanguinary Guard were devastated in the assault on Bale by the High Fleet Leviathan, and they were killed nearly to a man. So the old guard is mostly dead. But even if that weren't true, we know that the most stalwart heroes of the chapter are taking the Rubicon Primaris and getting the surgery to become Primaris Marines, and there's no reason why the Sanguinary Guard would not be a part of that as well. In addition, we know that every chapter of the Blood has a own Sanguinary Guard, and since there are, of course, Primaris only chapters founded by Guilliman, there should logically be Primaris Sanguinary Guard out there. I mean, let's be honest guys, the writing is on the wall. Primaris Marines are the new Space Marines, and I think that's a good thing. The future is these new Primaris proportions, and as I've shown in this video, you can get all the character of the old Marines in the new Primaris sculpts, and you can even go farther. And it's a blast to do so. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, let me know down below, and we'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.